The alien warrior stood in the broken hangar, her boots planted firmly on the cold metal floor. Smoke drifted around her like slow-moving ghosts, carrying the smell of burned wires, plasma fire, and blood. Red emergency lights flashed again and again, painting everything in warning colors. Around her lay the bodies of soldiers, some human, some alien, twisted and still. The battle was over here, but the war was not. She raised her weapon and aimed it at the last human standing. He was tall, but he looked smaller now. His heavy armor was cracked and blackened, and sparks jumped from a damaged joint at his shoulder. One arm hung low, clearly injured. His breathing was slow and rough, each breath costing him effort. Still, he stood straight, refusing to kneel. The alien warrior's eyes stayed sharp and focused. She had been trained for moments like this since childhood. Finish the enemy. Do not hesitate. Humans were dangerous. Humans were unpredictable. Humans always fought until the end. Drop your weapon, she commanded. Her voice came out cold, translated perfectly by the device in her helmet. The human looked down at his hands. There was no weapon there. I don't have one, he said quietly. Her grip tightened. Do not lie. I'm not, he replied. His voice was tired, not afraid. I stopped fighting a while ago. That confused her. Humans were supposed to scream, to beg, or to attack without thinking. This one did none of that. He simply stood there, surrounded by death, as if he had already accepted his fate. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The alarms continued to scream. Somewhere far away, explosions echoed through the station. Then the human slowly raised his uninjured hand. The warrior stiffened instantly. Her weapon followed the movement, ready to fire. Do not move, she warned. Any sudden action will be your last. He nodded once, showing he understood. I won't fight you, he said. But before you kill me, let me do one thing. Her instincts screamed danger. What thing? I want you to see me, he answered. That made no sense. She had already seen him. A human soldier, an enemy, a target. Slowly, carefully, he reached for the locking seal on his chest. Armor, her finger, rested on the trigger. Stop, she snapped. If you shoot now, he said calmly, you'll never know. Her training told her to fire, to end it. But something in his voice, steady, honest, made her pause. Just for a second, he broke the seal. With a soft hiss, the front plate of his armor came loose. He pulled it away and let it fall to the floor with a heavy clang that echoed through the hangar. Beneath it, his undersuit was torn and dark with dried blood. And beneath that were scars, long scars, deep scars. Scars that crossed his chest, his ribs, his shoulders. Some were clean cuts. Others were burns. Old wounds that had healed badly, telling stories of pain and survival. The alien warrior's breath caught, without her meaning it to. This was not the body of a young soldier. This was the body of someone who had been fighting for a long time. The human continued. Slowly, respectfully, he removed another piece of armor. Then another. Each piece hit the floor like a final decision. I stayed here, he said softly, his eyes never leaving hers, when everyone else ran. Her heart beat harder. She didn't want to listen, but she did. When your fleet attacked this place, he went on, they told us to evacuate. But the transports were full. There wasn't room for everyone. The warrior swallowed. Her weapon was still raised, but it felt heavier now, So I stayed, he said. Someone had to. He reached for his helmet. Her voice came out rough. If you take that off, there is no going back. He gave a small, sad smile. I know. The helmet came free. His face was pale and worn. One eye was swollen nearly shut. A line of dried blood ran from his temple down to his jaw. His expression was not angry. It was not proud. It was exhausted. He looked at her like a man who had already lost everything. I just want you to know, he said, barely louder than a whisper, who you're killing. For the first time in her life, the alien warrior hesitated not because of fear, but because something deep inside her had begun to crack. The hangar felt strangely quiet after his words. Even though the alarms still screamed around them, the alien warrior stood frozen, her weapon aimed at his bare chest, yet her finger no longer pressed firmly on the trigger. Her eyes moved slowly over him, no longer scanning for threats, but taking him in as something unfamiliar, a living truth. The human lowered his hands to his sides. He made no effort to cover his scars. They were wide and uneven, crossing his skin like old maps of suffering. Some were thin and pale, others thick and dark. They told of blades, explosions, and burns that should have killed him but did not. She had seen wounded soldiers before, warriors trained to ignore pain, but this was different. These scars were not from one battle. They were from many. You are still standing, she said, almost to herself. He nodded once. Habit. Her eyes flicked up to his face. The word was simple, but it carried weight. Habit meant years. Habit meant loss. Habit meant he had learned to live with pain instead of running from it. Why? She asked suddenly. Why keep fighting when your body is already broken? The human took a slow breath. Because if I stop, others suffer. Her grip weakened. That answer did not fit the image of humans she had been taught. They were supposed to be selfish, violent, unthinking. She stepped closer without realizing it. Her boots echoed softly on the metal floor. The distance between hunter and prey shrank until she could see the small details, the shaking in his fingers, the tightness around his eyes as he fought to stay upright. You could have fled, she said. Your people did. Some did, he answered gently. Some couldn't. His voice cracked on the last word. The warrior followed his gaze to the far corner of the hangar, where a broken transport lay half-crushed under fallen debris. Burn marks scarred its side. She remembered passing that area earlier. She had smelled smoke, and something else, fear, double quotes. There were civilians here, he continued. Families, children. They were hiding when the first shots were fired. Her chest tightened. She told herself it was anger, but it wasn't. They were screaming, he said quietly. Not because they were dying, because they were afraid. He turned slightly, showing her his back. A long, twisted burn scar ran from his shoulder down to his lower spine. Plasma beam, he explained. Took it while pulling a little girl out from under a beam. The warrior's breath stopped. A child, her weapon lowered another inch. You could have let her die, she whispered. Yes, he said. I could have. Then why didn't you? He looked back at her, eyes tired but steady. Because she looked at me and believed I wouldn't. Something inside the alien warrior shifted. She had faced death countless times, but this was heavier than any battlefield. She remembered her own childhood training, how weakness was burned out of her people, how mercy was called a flaw, How children were taught that survival mattered more than kindness. Yet here stood a human, broken and bleeding, who had chosen pain so someone small could live. Her hand began to shake. "You killed my soldiers," she said. Forcing the words out, he did not argue. They were going to clear the shelter. No survivors. Her throat tightened. She knew the order. She had heard it herself. For a long moment, neither spoke. The alarms dimmed as backup power failed. The red lights slowed. The human swayed slightly. Instinct moved her before thought. She stepped forward and caught his arm to steady him. The moment her hand touched his skin, she froze. She was helping an enemy. He looked down at her hand, then back at her face. There was no victory in his eyes. No mockery. "Sorry," he said softly. "Didn't mean to fall." She pulled her hand back as if burned. "I should kill you," she said, more to convince herself than him. "Yes," he agreed. "You should." That answer struck harder than any protest. He met her gaze again. "But if you do, remember this place. Remember the ones who couldn't fight back." The warrior stared at him, weapon hanging useless at her side. For the first time since she had put on armor, she was no longer sure who the enemy truly was. The hangar seemed to shrink around them, the smoke curling slowly like restless spirits. The human stood upright, chest rising and falling with uneven breaths, scars crossing his body like a map of survival. The alien warrior kept her weapon lowered, but her eyes were sharp, wary. Every instinct she had screamed that this was a trick, that humans were cunning, that one false move and it could be the end. Yet she could not raise her weapon. "Not now. You killed my squad," she said finally, her voice tight, a low growl hiding fear behind discipline. Her words cut through the air, sharp as any blade. "Yes," he answered softly, his tone steady, almost gentle. "I did, but they were going to burn the shelters. Children were inside." The word children struck her like lightning. She had heard it in stories, had known fear and loss, but it never touched her like this. The human, this frail, battered figure, had saved lives at the cost of his own body. Her fingers twitched near the weapon. "You are still standing," she whispered. It was not admiration, not yet. It was disbelief. She had been trained to recognize weakness, to exploit it, but what she saw was not weakness. It was endurance. It was humanity in its rawest, most stubborn form. He nodded, his eyes weary but unyielding. "I stayed. I couldn't leave. Someone had to protect them." The warrior's mind raced. Her entire life had been a sequence of orders and logic. Enemy, ally, threat, kill, survive. But these rules felt small in the presence of this human. This man had chosen his path, not for power, not for victory, but for something else. Something she could not name. Her weapon pressed lightly against the floor. She did not lift it. She could not. "Why?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost fragile. "Why risk yourself, your body?" "It is broken, because if I didn't, they would have died," he said simply. "And someone has to stay when others run. Someone has to be willing to bleed, to fall, to survive long enough to protect those who can't fight back." His words echoed in her mind. She had been taught that humans were reckless, violent, cruel. She had been taught that mercy was weakness. Yet here he stood, unarmed, battered, offering nothing but truth. And it was stronger than any weapon. Her weapon slipped slightly in her hands. She blinked, trying to clear her mind. But it was no use. She was unprepared for this. She had faced monsters, battlefields, death itself, but never a human willing to show her his pain instead of hiding it. "You are human," she said. The statement was not a question. It was an observation, heavy with weight, yet, "You are unlike any I have known." He gave a small, tired smile. "I am human. I am broken. But I am alive, and that is enough to make a difference." She could feel a strange warmth creeping through her, a foreign emotion she had not allowed herself to name. Confusion, respect, sympathy, perhaps all three. It was dangerous. She knew it, but she could not stop it. He gestured weakly toward the exit. "There are others outside," he said. "Some are trapped. Some are alive. If you fire, it will be for nothing." She looked past him, to the smoke, to the chaos, to the echoes of battle fading into silence. The realization hit her hard. He was not just a human soldier. He was a shield, a protector, a reminder of something her training had never allowed her to see. I don't understand," she admitted. "Humans. I thought you fought only for yourselves." He shook his head slowly. "We do fight for ourselves sometimes, but not always. Some of us fight to protect others, even if it costs us everything." Her weapon clattered softly on the floor as her grip slipped. The sound rang in the silence like a bell. She stared at him, unarmed, scarred, human in every way and yet more courageous than any warrior she had ever faced. For the first time, she wondered if victory was truly about strength, or if it was about something else entirely, something far more terrifying than any battlefield. Truth. And in that moment, as the alarms flickered and the smoke hung heavy in the air, she felt her resolve crumble. Not because she was weak, but because she was faced with the undeniable proof that a human could be more than a soldier. A human could be a hero, and heroes could make even the strongest warrior hesitate. The hangar's red lights flickered, casting long shadows across the wreckage, painting the walls with smoke and fire. The alien warrior stood still, her weapon lying heavy at her side, unused, almost forgotten. She had been trained her entire life to see humans as unpredictable, dangerous and weak, but this human, battered and scarred, was none of those things. He was more than she could understand, more than her training allowed her to classify. "You could have died," she said finally, her voice quiet, almost trembling. "Many would have, but you survived. Why?" He looked at her with tired eyes, a faint line of blood across his cheek. "Because someone had to." His voice was soft, steady, and full of an honesty she could not ignore. "I could not leave them, she repeated, confusion mixing with something new, something unsettling. "You mean the children?" He nodded. "The ones hiding under the collapsed beams, the ones crying in the smoke, the ones who trusted me to protect them while I could barely stand myself. I stayed because no one else could." The warrior's throat tightened. Her entire life had been built on rules. Conquer or die, obey or perish, strike or be struck. But this human, he lived outside those rules. He had chosen courage over obedience, compassion over survival. He had made a choice she could not understand, and yet she felt it pressing against her chest like a weight she could not shake. "You show me your scars." As if to prove something, she said. "But why? Why show me instead of hiding them?" "Because if I don't show them," he replied, voice quiet, "you will never understand. You will never see that humans are more than soldiers, more than enemies. We survive, sometimes to save others. Her hand trembled slightly, and she realized she had unconsciously lowered it even further. Her warrior instincts screamed at her to attack, to end the unknown before it became a threat, but something inside her hesitated. A new kind of fear coursed through her, fear of seeing too clearly, fear of seeing humanity, raw and honest, standing before her without a weapon, without pride, without pretense. You are an enemy, she said, forcing herself to speak. I am trained to kill you. Yes, he said softly, almost sadly. And you could. But I am telling you who I am, not to threaten, but to survive. And maybe, to make you see that there is more to war than winning battles. She stepped back, blinking rapidly, her chest tight. For the first time, she questioned everything she had learned. Her commanders, her orders, her training, all of it seemed smaller, weaker, fragile in the face of this human's quiet strength. He gave a faint, tired smile. I am just a human, he said, but I know what it is to fight for something that matters, and to carry the weight of those I cannot save. The warrior's eyes moved over his scars again, over the bruises, the burns, the cuts that should have ended him. They were proof of endurance, proof of sacrifice, proof of a will she could not break. And the truth pressed on her mind like a storm all her life. She had believed humans were simple, violent, selfish, expendable. But this one human, standing bare and wounded, had rewritten everything she thought she knew. I don't understand your kind, she admitted, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. I thought you were weak. He shook his head slowly. We are weak sometimes, but even the weakest can stand for what is right. Her weapon slid fully to the floor with a soft metallic clang. The sound echoed through the hangar, sharp and final. She felt her hands trembling not from fear, but from the realization that she could no longer see him as a simple enemy. For the first time in her life, doubt filled her entirely. She questioned her orders, her loyalty, her mission, even the meaning of her own strength. And as she looked at the human, standing battered, bleeding, and unarmed, she understood something that terrified her more than any battlefield. He was showing her what courage really meant. Courage was not strength. Courage was not training. Courage was standing unarmed, facing death, and still choosing to protect life, and she was not sure she could. Fire upon such courage. The hangar felt impossibly quiet now. The smoke still drifted through the broken beams, the red lights casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. The alien warrior's weapon lay forgotten at her side. Her mind raced, but the thoughts were heavy and slow, like metal dragged through water. All her life, she had been trained to follow orders without hesitation. Strike first, strike hard, leave nothing alive. But here, standing before this human, every rule she had ever learned felt meaningless. He leaned slightly on a nearby support beam, blood staining his uniform, one leg trembling beneath him. And yet, he did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at her, exhausted but steady, and waited. You should kill me, he said quietly, almost as if reading her thoughts. I would not stop you. Her chest tightened. Every instinct screamed that he was right. She could fire now, and no one would stop her. The battle outside was ending. Her comrades were retreating. No one would question her actions, and yet she could not. I could, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. but something tells me I shouldn't." He gave a small, tired smile. "Then don't." The warrior swallowed hard. She had faced death countless times, yet nothing had felt so dangerous. Not fire, not plasma beams, not alien predators tearing through walls. Nothing was as terrifying as seeing the truth standing before her, unarmed, refusing to fight, yet refusing to fall. "You are different," she said. "You're kind. I have never seen this." He nodded. "Most humans fight for survival. Some fight for revenge. Few fight for others. That is what matters." Her eyes swept over the hangar, seeing the destruction in a new light. The broken machines, the fallen soldiers, the smoke it, all felt different now. All the bloodshed, all the violence, suddenly seemed smaller. Not meaningless, but secondary, because in the middle of it, this human had chosen something else. Compassion, mercy, courage. You risked your life. "For them," she said, her voice catching. "For people you didn't even know." "Yes," he said simply, "because someone had to. Someone had to make the choice when others couldn't." The alien warrior felt a strange heat in her chest, something she had never experienced. Pride, admiration, or maybe fear that she could not follow her orders now, fear that she might be wrong. She looked at the human scars again, the burns, the cuts, the old wounds that refused to heal. Each one told a story of pain, but also of endurance, of choices made when death was easier, of life preserved when destruction was simpler. "You are unarmed," she said finally, "and yet I am afraid of you." He smiled faintly. "I do not want to fight you, and I am not afraid. That is the difference." Her hand trembled, almost imperceptibly, as she reached down and picked up her weapon. She held it, but not in threat, not yet. She was testing herself, testing the boundaries of everything she had been taught. "I was sent to conquer," she admitted softly, almost to herself. "To finish this battle." He nodded. "And you can. But sometimes, survival is not about winning battles. It is about knowing when to stop, knowing when mercy is stronger than violence." Her breath came quickly now. Outside, the faint sounds of retreating engines reminded her that the war was still happening. But here, in this moment, time felt suspended. Slowly, she lowered her weapon fully to the floor. The sound of it hitting the metal rang through the hangar, loud and final. She stepped back, giving him space. For the first time, they were not enemy and soldier. They were two warriors who had seen the worst of war, and yet both still understood what it meant to protect, to endure, to be human, or perhaps, to be something more. He looked at her, breathing hard, blood streaking his face, and offered her a faint, tired smile. "Thank you," he whispered. She did not answer. Words felt impossible. Her mind was full of questions she did not have answers for. But deep inside, she knew one thing clearly. She had made a choice. And that choice, this simple act of lowering her weapon, of seeing him as more than an enemy, was far braver than any battle she had ever fought. For the first time in her life, she understood what it truly meant to be courageous. Not to strike, not to survive, but to see life, even in the enemy, and choose to protect it. And in that moment, everything changed. The sounds of battle outside had faded into distant echoes. Smoke drifted lazily through the hangar, carrying the smell of scorched metal and fire. The alien warrior stood a few feet away from the human, her weapon forgotten, her mind racing with thoughts she had never imagined having. Every order she had followed, every rule drilled into her since childhood, felt meaningless now. The human, scarred, bloodied, exhausted, was alive and she could not strike him. She could not. He leaned slightly against a twisted support beam, breathing unevenly, but his eyes never left hers. For a moment, she realized that he was not just standing there as a survivor, he was standing there as a lesson, a living proof of something her war-hardened mind had never considered. Courage could come without weapons. Bravery could exist without strength, and mercy could be a greater force than violence. Outside, distant engines hummed, and the occasional explosion reminded her that the war had not yet ended. Her commanders would be demanding confirmation of kills, expecting obedience, expecting her to follow orders without hesitation. She had a choice. She could fire, and no one would stop her. The human would die, and the mission would be complete. It was the easiest choice, the safest choice, but it was not right. Her fingers brushed her weapon, the cold metal heavy in her grip. For the first time, she understood the weight of a single decision, the difference between killing and sparing. And she saw in him a truth she could not deny. He had risked everything to save others, not for glory, not for survival, but because he understood what it meant to be responsible for life, even at great cost. You are still alive, she whispered, almost to herself, even after everything. He nodded slowly, his face pale but steady. I stayed because someone had to. Someone had to protect them when no one else could. The alien warrior's chest tightened. She had grown up in a world that valued strength above all else. Yet here, in front of her, a human who should have been weak was stronger than any soldier she had ever commanded. Strength was not measured in weapons or armor, was measured in choice, in the courage to act when it mattered most. You saved lives when you should have run, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Why? He looked at her, eyes weary but clear. Because someone had to. And because surviving is meaningless if you do not protect what matters. Her hands shook. She could feel her weapons slipping slightly. Every instinct screamed at her to fire, to obey, to kill the enemy, but her mind was telling her otherwise. She realized something terrifying. She was no longer sure what it meant to be the enemy. This human, this soldier, had changed the rules of combat with something no weapon could match. Humanity, for the first time. She questioned her orders, her loyalty, her very understanding of what it meant to be a warrior. She had trained her life to fight, to conquer, to obey, but here was proof that true strength came from restraint, from mercy, from choosing to protect life even when death was easier. Outside, the distant rumble of retreating engines reminded her that her people were leaving. They expected reports, expected obedience, expected her to follow orders without hesitation. But she could not. Not now. Not after seeing this human risk everything, bleed everything, and still stand unarmed before her. Finally, slowly, she lowered her weapon completely. It clanged against the metal floor, a sharp, final sound that echoed across the hangar. She stepped back, giving him space, letting the tension drain from her body. The human blinked, faintly smiling despite the blood and bruises. "Thank you," he said quietly. She did not respond. Words failed her. Her mind was full of questions she did not have answers for, thoughts too heavy to speak aloud. But one truth was clear. She had made a choice. And that choice, choosing mercy over violence, life over orders, was far braver than anything she had ever done in battle. In that suspended moment, The alien warrior understood the power of humanity in a way she had never imagined. It was not in conquest, not in weapons, not in fear. It was in courage, in compassion, in choosing to protect life even when it was hardest to do so. And that choice would change everything.